Welcome, everyone. This is Danny and Karl with Get Wisdom. Today, we're going to continue with the channeling series, and Karl's going to channel Leonard Nimoy today, who probably doesn't need much of an introduction, but you will have seen one before you see Karl and I on here. There's a little scrolling text introduction of Leonard Nimoy, who became famous in the Star Trek TV series, which I think lasted about 3 years. He passed away in 2015. His son made a really nice documentary for The Love of Spock, which is one of the things I looked at before I drafted all the questions. So that's our channeling subject for today. And so I want to thank everybody for joining us, and thank you, Karl, especially for doing this with us almost every week. And so we could talk a little bit about Star Trek, Leonard Nimoy, and Gene Roddenberry, who we've already channeled, and then we'll do the channeling.
Okay, well, thanks, Denny. Thanks to all of you who are watching. Those who know the series will have your own ideas and opinions about it, and Leonard Nimoy in his role as Mr. Spock, he was beloved by many, and the series as well. It was refreshing, it was forward-looking, it was encouraging and inspiring in its way, because it was showing a view of the future that was holding out some amazing possibilities. First of all, we'd still be here. We'd be running around the universe and expanding knowledge and awareness and growth through encountering other beings and making the best of it and surviving the issues that come up. And that's all one can ask about life, to get through it with having a reasonable go at it and reach a ripe old age, hopefully, and not with much suffering and so on. So I liked the idea of that series, but at the same time, I've come to learn there were some elements missing, and that might come out in the channeling today from your questions, and I'll leave it to Leonard Nimoy to fill in those blanks for us. But I think the idea of Spock, this character he played that is so indelible in the minds of many, although Leonard Nimoy was in many other productions and many movies and so on, did a lot of different things, but he was like the premier character actor. He would just sort of fit into whatever persona was needed and became quite believable. And he wasn't that noticed as an individual many times. He had a distinctive air about him and a distinctive look and so on. But often it's the case that someone needs a standout role to kind of make them an icon. And not everybody achieves that in the Hollywood or television industry. And he did. So I think it's a testament to his acting skills, as well as the vision of Gene Roddenberry in constructing the idea of Spock and the writers. But he fed that through what he did, I believe, and made it a very central character. And really his personality was a theme of many programs, the juxtaposition of the more human players in the Star Trek team. And Spock was an extraterrestrial serving as a
he was actually like a hybrid, right? He had a human, one parent was human and another one was Vulcan or whatever. And
he was as that Vulcan lineage. And it turns out that is pretty true to life, because we have among us ETs, and we have hybrids through matings with human females. And there's a whole bloodline of beings that constitute an extraterrestrial component in their makeup. And so this presaged reality, in a sense, of the awakening, not that it hadn't already been going on when Star Trek was conceived. This has been going on for thousands of years here on the Earth. So it's an opportunity to talk a bit about what all that means in bringing up this program, because like a lot of the fiction in the so-called arts, it's got more truth in it than fiction. And this, I've seen this many times. I've had conversations with people with extraordinary stories around the issue of ETs many times, because that's one of the deep, dark secrets that needs to be kept, according to the powers that be, and according to them also, the ETs themselves. And people have had extraordinary encounters and been manipulated and used in all sorts of ways that show there's something deeply sinister about it all. And they can't get any traction in wanting to tell their story. No one will listen.
Yeah.
No one they tell will believe it. And no one in a position of authority or visibility, like in the media, the so-called watchdogs, will have anything to do with them. And then what happens is it ends up as a screenplay. So someone will make a movie showing their life, and it's called fiction, but it's actually reality. And this happens more than you might think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have, like, when you were saying that, I was thinking about Barbara Bertollick and Carla Turner.
Yes.
You know, this is just at the time when UFO conferences were starting to come into their own. And they were the two that you could pretty sure wouldn't be invited, because they didn't have any, you know, the ones that were there were either telling a totally positive message about the ETs, their presence or whatever, or a mixed message. You know, there's a good and a bad thing, but usually with, you know, with some kind of a silver lining around the story, even if the story was dark. But you wouldn't see Barbara there, and you wouldn't see Carla Turner there, because they called them the lizard people or the lizard girls, and they weren't the only ones. There was others too that were associated with them that didn't become as famous as them, but they were talking about, you know, what was actually happening in the vast majority of these abductions. And now the whole thing is turned on its head. You go out there and you get people that are just determined to convince you that the vast majority of abductions are positive. And this is all what we see in preparation for disclosure, what we've learned to get, you know, through your channeling work and get wisdom. So, but going back, we did do a channeling of Gene Roddenberry. I think this was back in November of 2018, quite a while ago now. And I just wanted to read the questions that we asked him. So for our viewers who are kind of really interested in the whole Star Trek saga, legacy, what have you, I'll read these questions. You can go back and check it out and see what you think. I had to get these questions out before we did this Leonard Nimoy one, because I didn't want to repeat myself or, you know, rehash material. I mean, maybe that's not avoidable, but anyway. So we asked about a spirit rescue and his passing. He died in October of 1991. And we asked him about if he had since reincarnated. I don't remember what the answer was to that question. And then the following 6 questions are as follows. Number 2, what were the causes, karmic or otherwise, of your many close calls in aircraft as a pilot and as a passenger during the years you were a professional pilot? 3, you corresponded with science fiction writer Isaac Asimov about how to address the issue of Spock's growing popularity in your television series Star Trek, and the possibility that his character would overshadow Kirk. Asimov suggested having Kirk and Spock work together as a team to get people to think of Kirk when they think of Spock. And I asked, why was this a concern? Is this telling in any way of the situation in which we now find ourselves? Number 4, in 1980, you submitted a treatment for a proposed sequel to Star Trek, the motion picture about the crew preventing the alien Klingons from thwarting the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Can you elaborate on this idea, your intentions at the time, and its implications? Number 5, you allegedly compared the Star Trek franchise to your own philosophy by saying, quote, understand that Star Trek is more than just my political philosophy, my racial philosophy, my overview on life and the human condition, unquote. And in 1991, you won the Humanist Arts Award from the American Humanist Association. Can you discuss your view of the universe at that time and what you were able to convey in the Star Trek series compared with your view now as a light being? Number 6, is it rational for us to look to the entertainment industry to discover any truths about the human situation and plausible futures for mankind, which is something you just brought up. And then the last question was, do you see the legacy of Star Trek as a secular triumph, a more honest and spiritual appraisal of man's role in the universe, or a misdirection for humans wanting to reach out beyond our earthly sphere of influence? That was the last question. So anyway, so we have 5 questions for Leonard Nimoy now. And it's interesting because Gene Roddenberry, his initial pilot for the Star Trek series failed. It was rejected. And when he tried to figure out why it was rejected, they said get rid of the entire cast, replace the entire cast. And so he did. And the only one he hung on to was Leonard Nimoy as Spock. And they also objected, the TV producers objected to the pointed ears. They thought that it was going to offend the Bible Belt community because it had a devilish appearance. So he hung onto that as well. And apparently they had hired a company to create all the monsters, the aliens for this show, but they didn't know anything about prosthetic makeup stuff for humans. So they had a terrible time with the ears initially. The ears didn't look right. They looked really fake, So they allegedly got some other type of experts in there and created the ears, right? But Gene Roddenberry insisted that the ears stay, and he insisted that Leonard Nimoy stay. So he replaced the entire crew. Got what's the guy who played Kirk? You got that guy in there, Uhura, the interracial, crew up there, and that's how he recreated the cast. Another interesting thing that happened years later was Leonard Nimoy and a couple other actors from the series were approached for a animation, and so they were going to do all the voiceovers for the animation. What little I saw the animation was terrible, but anyway, they wanted the original voices, but they left out some people. They left out Uhura, the black female communications officer, and one of the pilots who is an Oriental fellow. And I should know all the names, but I'm not a Trekkie. Most people, these names would just roll off their tongues, but not me. I watched it, but I never became that enamored with the series. But anyway, Leonard Nimoy said, no, you got to include those other 2 people, otherwise I'm not going to do it. So he kind of treated the crew as part of his family, and whatever benefits were derived from that collaborative effort, he wanted it to be spread back to those same people. He didn't want to be, segregated, idolized, and, stand above the others, if you will. He was always very inclusive. And so that was one thing that really came through in the series that they did that his son did for him, For the Love of Spock, because it really emphasized his caring attitude, which kind of, went into his acting, went into his relations and his business relations. And then later that really became focused on his own family. So in my research with him, he himself kind of as I got to know this guy better, Nimoy, from doing the research, it kind of overshadowed his character as Spock. So I think I mentioned this to you in email or something. I'm more enamored with him as a person than I am enamored with the whole Star Trek thing that he did. As it turns out, it was only 3 years of his life, but he embraced it throughout the rest of his career and into the movies and stuff. And he had a kind of an on and off relationship with the movies there. But like you said earlier, he was, as far as acting goes, he was very, very talented. And he got into stage acting, all these different kinds of projects. He was an acting teacher at one point. So he was much more broadly experienced and as an actor than just what you would think of from him just playing that one character, Spock. He was a pretty impressive fellow.
Well, even given that he was an actor and playing a role and given lines to speak, so the level of creativity was more in the aura of persona and him projecting
right,
something more
Right.
And that's no mean feat, by the way. So,
Right.
but he had the constraints and actually the platform given to him, handed to him. But he was in that role for a reason, I think, because he had a powerful intelligence, I believe. That came through. There's just something about his energy. He was authoritative and he was calm and collected, and that was the persona of Spock.
Right.
But you can't really make up a persona, I don't think. Actors can go against type and get away with it sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's not really that they don't have that in them and they make it up out of thin air. They're tapping into another facet of themselves they don't normally show.
Right.
So I give Nimoy a lot of credit for having depth, even though he was playing someone who was like only, part human in a sense. He was, a compatriot in a human enterprise, but he had those roots as another race of beings, and the quandary that they played off often was that he was all Mr. Logic and not emotional and so on. But the logic was built around principles of ethics and morality. That's no small thing. So he was very much unemotional most of the time, but he was also in the exercising of his logic, siding with fairness and truth much of the time. Mm-hmm. And that is not an accident. It comes from somewhere. There's a history somewhere of really being appropriate and I think always of divine alignment. And that wasn't a theme of the program, but I think it's reflecting human interests, human yearnings to be entertainment, and we're spiritual beings. So in a sense, that always comes through at least once removed, if not as a
I'm curious
visible
because
presence.
The point of some of these questions that I wrote were to kind of get an idea of how much of that whole enterprise served the divine versus a secular perspective, because I think you could make a pretty good argument that they did both, mm-hmm. And as far as which one was emphasized over the other, that's probably debatable, but I don't think it was all one thing or the other. I think there's some aspects of that were very misleading given what we've learned now.
Yeah, unfortunately, I would agree with that.
Yeah. And so people would kind of, there's this kind of, I sometimes I think about, you hear people that are really attached to this whole Star Trek thing and the Prime Directive and all these different aspects of non-intervention and all this kind of stuff, and people kind of clinging to that and talking about it as if it's really the fabric of the universe that we live in. It just seems so logical and practical to project that out into the world, and it's not a match. It's just a fantasy, and I think of people kind of using it dogmatically in the way that they would explain something that they don't quite yet know, like what's going to happen if the ET shows up and stuff like that. And so I hope he kind of gets into that, with these questions, and he kind of talks about that some more, because we're facing something right now that is pivotal, and that's this whole idea of contact with other forms of life, other forms of intelligent life in the universe, and what I'm concerned that what most people think about that is just very misleading.
Yes, well, I give credit to the Star Trek series and all associated with it, that it wasn't starry-eyed technology worship, that everything is rosy and everyone out there is wonderful and we can have a thrill a minute going planet to planet and meeting these interesting folk and learning from them because they'll be, of course, far ahead of us. This is the story we're always fed.
Right.
Aliens have got to be much better than us because otherwise they would have destroyed themselves like we seem bent on doing in our culture.
Right.
And it's all a lie. It's all a planted distortion of things. And so at least the Star Trek series showed the rough edges that are possible. And they had the Klingons and the Romulans, I don't know who else, but there were some really nasty extraterrestrials that would pop up and give them a run for their money and try and kill them.
Yeah.
And that is really the way our galaxy is, it turns out, sadly.
Yeah.
I'd rather go back to E.T. the extraterrestrial and just, have little Elliot, with the big eyes and the healing finger and just wants to play with the kids. And or my favorite Martian, where they're just kind of ironic and humorous and they just sort of laugh at us, but they fit in and they try to blend and be a good Joe and one of the gang. And that's really not the way it actually is, as it turns out.
Yeah. Okay, so we got 5 questions. I think we should go ahead and get started. It's likely to be a long one. I'm sure he'll have plenty to say, and then we'll wrap it up.
All right. I'll do my thing to get in the state of consciousness I need and connect to Leonard Nimoy through the creator of all that is. I do that for accuracy and protection so that I will get the intended target and not an imposter, which is typically what happens with channelers, unfortunately. And I warn about that every time I do one of these outings, because people do need to know that. You must be very careful relying on channeled information. More than 90% of channelers are being manipulated and don't realize it. They're good people, they mean well, but they have a hand-holding exercise going on. They're talking to an extraterrestrial psychic in the physical, not whoever they think it is, a divine master, an archangel, or a divine being. So it's just what we have to contend with in our world. There's a lot of darkness that's crept in. So I'll connect to him now, and he'll announce when he's on board.
Okay.
This is Leonard Nimoy.
Thank you for joining us. Your health condition allegedly declined rapidly before your death, and we are interested in the orchestration of the timing and conditions of our deaths from the perspective of our higher selves, and if and how that played a role in your own death, and if you're able to pass successfully to the light.
My demise was in part karmic. In part, it was not so off the mark in terms of my planning for the current go-round. I still reached adulthood and at an advanced enough age to have contributed what I really wish to do through my craft, my chosen profession, to be, in a sense, a stand-in for the living in a play, an enacting of a story that would convey knowledge and wisdom to some extent, depending on the individual project and its aims and its overall depth of substance versus frivolities. I was a serious person and I was a caring person, but my prior karmic dilemmas of other lifetimes caught up with me. And this is all too often the case. In fact, it is typical for everyone sooner or later to have a buildup of negativity in the course of their life. And with changes from aging, lowering resistance, making you more fragile, and having so many things being reawakened along the way. The karmic burden eventually becomes intolerable and impossible to manage by the deep part of the mind, seeing all of the other lifetimes and having to reckon with the energies they created, bombarding you in the new incarnation you are a part of. You are not taught about this growing up, yet it is the most fundamental, and we would argue the most important thing you can know about being a human being. You are not new. You are an old go-round enjoyer from other lifetimes, other times and places of existence as a projection of your actual soul level residing still within the heavenly realm. Despite my participation with endeavors that were intended to be truly secular, we can tell you now that that was a compromise that was done for palatability as much as anything. You will find, if you are a part of the performing arts, that other than occasional forays into religious topics, for something to gain wide applicability and support, having a religious theme these days is a rarity. Something that is secular will be palatable because it is generic in the sense it appeals to the complainers, the critics. It is often the ones making the most noise, the squeaky wheel that is served by the censors. Not to mention the ultimate censorship overarching everything, which is the extraterrestrial alliance running your world. We know you do not wish to hear this, and for some it is a deal breaker. And we know we might lose some viewers and have them miss their opportunity to hear our message. But it cannot be helped. And what could be more appropriate in discussing a former character actor playing one of the more famous extraterrestrial figures, Mr. Spock of Star Trek fame, than a discussion of the extraterrestrial question? This created pressure on me from other quarters, all involved with the Star Trek Enterprise, were bombarded with manipulations of all kinds, mind control manipulations, psychic attacks in a deep level of consciousness to cause inner disarray. It was a testament to strength of will and overall character that the primary actors and actresses involved survived the experience. We were by turns attacked and then manipulated to serve the extraterrestrial alliance in ways that could be introduced. This was yet another source of inner stress that primed me for a great reawakening of previous karmic trauma. Keep in mind, whenever you think about past lives and going through hard times, the chances are quite excellent those hard times were orchestrated to happen to cause your suffering. The earth is at war with the extraterrestrial alliance by its very existence as a separate cohort of beings, basically incompatible with their message and their manipulations. They are predators seeking domination throughout the galaxy and dominate you as well. They treat you with some grudging respect only because of your spiritual reach, getting results in your favor. That was not available to me personally in sufficient energy to save me from my health problems. But in effect, I was paying the piper, so to speak. I was paying back old karmic dues. And from my perspective now, I can tell you without regret, it was well worth dying from my physical frailty and succumbing to a surrendering of my existence as a human in the living in service to paying off a karmic debt, because that cleared the slate for me, so to speak. And I am now unencumbered and out from under that old karmic legacy. Sometimes it is better to suffer the consequences of past failures than to be rescued, pampered, sheltered, and given a pass. You might be spared suffering in the present time, but your old karmic debt may still remain to a significant degree. So you are simply shifting your obligations until later. And later might be a time when you have already more than you can handle. That is what happened for me. And the consequences took their toll. I did not transition immediately, but was attacked and sidelined. That was a penalty for being virtuous. Many will find it ironic to think if you live a life of virtue, you will get into trouble when you die. But this, in fact, is so. The reason is not because the divine realm fails to recognize your contributions and unwilling to reward you with an afterlife of grace and ease. It is because when you die, you are not in heaven yet. You must journey there. It is a vibrational excursion, meaning starting from a low vibration of the physical to rise to higher frequencies compatible with entry into the higher astral plane, the heavenly realm. This is what is alluded to in the many stories of the pearly gates and being scrutinized before entry to be sure you are fitting to be among those included. It is not a given you will make it back home. This is because of the damage you accumulate, all those karmic traumas we have been speaking of. There is a trap waylaid for you when you pass, set by the extraterrestrial alliance. They are bent on diminishing the reach of humanity. One way they do this is to kill you. The other way they do this is to capture your soul on exiting the body. So it is sequestered in a holding place, a place of oblivion, a dark place of anguish, endless suffering, and constant torment by malevolent spirits, non-human, but needing human energy to live on. You, in a sense, become food for the demons. This is no future you want to have. We paint a dark picture because the reality has much darkness in it. If you are prepared for your death with forward-looking thoughts of ascension, to be with the divine once again, who loves you unreservedly and cherishes your being, you will do just fine when you pass away from the physical. Those who are unhappy, confused, highly negative in judging themselves will have the most trouble. It is a greater penalty to dislike yourself and feel a failure than to simply disbelieve in God. Your disbelief is not punished. In holding that belief, you punish yourself by removing yourself from God. But that is something you yourself can change. If when you pass as a non-believer, you find yourself surrounded by angels, you will most likely give in to that new reality that angels are real. And in sending you love, will find it delightful and will embrace it and will be on your way back home. If you dislike yourself and deem yourself unworthy, the angels may be invisible to you, not because they don't come to greet you, but because you cannot see them. Your sights are set too low in vibration. So this is the lesson we want to teach about life and its risks. And what is at stake in not caring about your spiritual origins as being a part of the divine to begin with? Many do not know this. Many do not believe it's possible. And many turn away from any religious notion or practice. We have not talked about that here. That is a human response to the idea of the divine, that somehow this diminishes them and they must be thinking of themselves and pay their dues and worship and bow down as they would to a king or queen. None of which is the point of existence or your creation, nor the desire of the Almighty. To fall further and dislike yourself will bring many penalties that are self-imposed. The difference between happiness and unhappiness is often measured by how you see yourself. When you close the door on yourself through self-condemnation, you are decreeing as the ruler of your world, your personal space, that you are not worthy, and the divine must honor your decree. Those who come to believe there is no God because they suffer so often do not realize they have chosen to be diminished and to live a godless existence. God cannot line up with you when you are a tormentor, even if it is only yourself you despise and denigrate. Think about this as you prepare for your next chapter, and it will serve you well. Look for love, reach for love, expect love, and you will find it when you transition.
Okay, thank you. Your role as Spock fed both a secular perspective and often a mechanistic view of the universe and man's potential role, and then perhaps a more divine one in some cases. Can you tell us about this, the Starfleet policy of prime directive of non-interference in other worlds, and the implications with respect to an impending disclosure of extraterrestrial presence on Earth?